big rig in the shed today. Going to be doing a major service on it, which involves changing all the filters and lubricants, making sure the brakes are in adjustment, and just checking over the overall rig and a few other things. I'm going to do it all over the course of a few videos, so it's just not one big massive one. And I think we'll start off with the wheel bearing grease, so we'll get into it.
First things first, I'll get it up off the ground to a height that's easy to work with. Then jack it up off the 4-poster so I can pull the wheels off. Then smash the tyres off with a 19mm socket on the rattle gun. Then hit a few 10mm bolts to hold on the freewheeling hub. If you don't have these, you'll just have the Allen keys that I think is 8mm. You just got to pop them off. It is better off to do it while the wheel's on the ground, or get a buddy to hold the brakes while you try to crack them off. I'm now going for the 12mm bolts to hold the brake pads into the caliper. I'm taking the bottom one out, just cracking the top one so I can swivel it up, pull the brake pads out and put them somewhere that's not going to get them too dirty. Once the brake pads are out, I get a zip tie prepared and take out the top 12mm bolt, which lets half the caliper come loose, and I zip tie that out of the way because it's attached to a brake line. Zip tie it somewhere where it's not being pulled on. Then comes out the big ratchet with a 22mm socket, maybe 19, pretty sure it's 22, to crack off the other half of the caliper that's just got nothing attached to it, so you can just pull it off and get it out of the road. Now I lay out a rag so I don't lose the little things and also don't get them contaminated with grit. Now I'm undoing the Allen key bolts that I should have done earlier with the wheels on, or had a buddy hold the brakes before I took them off. I could use a rattle gun, but I couldn't find a socket. I think it's in the toolbox. It's on the back of this ute, and I couldn't be bothered to climb up there and go get it out. Instead, I put the Allen key in and used a longer Allen key to hold the hub tight in the other direction, and put a spanner on the Allen key I was using to crack them loose, which resulted in me slicing my finger on the rotor and bleeding for the rest of the video. After that drama, remove a quick circlip and remove that half of the hub that holds the CV in place. Now to attack the 3 screws that hold in the retaining washer for the wheel nut. And then I pick the washer out with the 2 holes in the nut, because usually they're offset from the washer, and you can put it in, lever the washer out and put it down. Alright, in the wheel nut there's 3 holes for the screws that you would have pulled out, and 2 holes perhaps for a tool you're supposed to use to undo it. I just stick 2 screwdrivers in the 2 holes that are there that don't have threads in them, and then stick another one, as I do in the video, between the 2 screwdrivers I got in the holes, and then twist it around, crank it around to loosen the nut off. Just a side note, the nut doesn't look like a nut, it's just a round bit of steel with those holes in it, so if you see that, you're looking at the nut, and then you got to crank it like I was saying and just wind it loose. Once the nut's off, the outer wheel bearing's exposed. You can either wriggle the hub and pick it out with a pick, or just pull the hub off, lay it down and then pull the bearing out. Looking at the wheel bearing, you want to look for any scratches or pitting in the rollers, and then even put it up against the light and try to look inside where the rollers run, see if there's any pitting or scratches in there. Then pull the hub off and lay it down somewhere. There'd be a lot better way to do this, probably with a pry bar or a heel bar or something, but it does work if you just use a screwdriver like this and work your way around. First of all, it lifts it up a little bit, but the screwdriver bottoms out on the other side. And then after going around like that till you get as far as you can go, as you'll see a little bit later here, I just stick the another smaller screwdriver underneath to get a little bit of extra movement and keep working it around, and eventually pops out. Once you got the seal out, the inner bearing is exposed, then you can take both of those wheel bearings over to the parts cleaner after checking them out. If you don't have a parts cleaner, you can fill a container with petrol because that works pretty good, or use one of those pressurized cans with brake cleaner in it just to get all the old grease out. The parts cleaner fluid eats grease, so I just rinse it down with brake cleaner anyway to get all of that off, and then the brake cleaner will dry off and leave nothing ready to be greased up. Next you get your wheel bearing grease. I'm using this Timken wheel bearing grease. Not bad stuff, I suppose. It's all really the same stuff. Then you want to scoop some up in your hand and then grab the bearing with the other hand, and then you sort of scrape it down your finger, and just as it gets towards your palm, you sort of press it up through in between the roller and the race that they sort of run on. And like you see in the video, you'll see after you keep doing it, it's sort of, you slowly keep pressing it through and through, and then repeat with the other bearing. Next up, you want to clean out the hub and the bearing races so that the wheel bearings don't get contaminated with all the old stuff in there. First, you just get some of those paper towels or rags and just clean up the majority of the old grease. Then get a rag or paper towel, spray it down with brake cleaner and repeat, and it'll really get them cleaned up real well. Then slip in the re-greased bearing. Then for the new hub seals I got here, I'll just unwrap them, and then I get something that's kind of heavy and flat, or as long as it's solid and flat, and then you can beat it with a hammer. I'm just using a 4-pound hammer, or I think it's a bit smaller than that. It's just got a flat edge that I can use to slowly beat it around evenly. If you use something like a chisel, you'll just ruin the seal. It's important to have it in as flat as possible and then work it around slowly till it keeps going in, and if it keeps popping out, just be patient. Now I get the old grease off the spindle, ready for the hub. I just got a little bit of extra grease to put in there, which you should probably do. I just put it in between where the two bearings are going to go, in a little bit of space there. Then up comes the hub, slides onto the spindle, followed by the outer bearing. And then the wheel nut. Then to stick those 2 screwdrivers in the holes made for tightening the wheel nut, and then get something long like a pry bar or a big screwdriver to tighten them 2 up. But you don't want to go super tight, otherwise you'll put too much load on the bearings and they'll wear out and heat up too much. Basically, you want to tighten it to where if you rock the top and bottom of the rotor, it would have a small amount of movement. Then tighten it 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn until that movement's gone, and then some. Then you rotate the rotor and make sure it doesn't have too much load on it. Here I am feeling for that little bit of movement, and then giving it just a little bit of extra nip. Once you get the tyre on, that's the best way to check, and then even after that you want to take it for a drive if you're unsure, and then lift it up when they're warm, and then really see if you got a little bit of movement, which means you got to tighten it a little extra. Then for the locking washer, if you spin it upside down, it sort of offsets the holes, because sometimes when you put it on, it doesn't line up with the screw holes, and if it still doesn't line up like it did for me, either way you put it, then you have to back it off or tighten up the nut just a little bit so that it does line up with the screws. Then to put back the 3 little screws. Doesn't hurt to double check the hub spins pretty freely. And then that part of the hub that the CV drives with the Allen key bolts. I did my trick to tighten them down. If not, you can just tighten them up good, and then when the wheel's on the ground, tighten them up properly, or get someone to hold the brakes when the brakes are back on. Then for the freewheeling hub, which can be a pain if you just play around with it after you pull it off. So when you pull it off, just make sure you don't move it much. And it only aligns 2 out of 6 ways you can put it on. Then give the 610 mils a little nip. Then that part of the caliper that mounts to the spindle. Don't want to leave that loose. Then cut the zip tie that held the other part of the caliper with the brake line on. Then just put in the top 12mm bolt and don't tighten it down. And then you can swivel it up, put the old brake pads back in, then lower it into position, put the bottom bolt in and tighten them both down. Once all the brakes are back on and hooked up, try to rotate the hub with your hand, make sure it's not seized up. It is normal for it to be a little bit tight though. Get your old hub seal, throw it over your shoulder. Then clear all the rubbish and tools out of the way for the tyre. Then get your tyre up there, locate it on the studs, and tighten it down. Once it's all tight, rotate the tyre and check for play back and forth. Do the other side. And after that, she's all good. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed.